Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name's Ian Fitzpatrick. I'm the Managing Director at Reading Solutions. We provide DreamBox Reading Plus, and I'm here with Ruth Everett. I'll let Ruth introduce herself now.
Hi, everybody, and good to meet you today. I'm Ruth Everett. I've worked in comprehensive schools all my life as a secondary English teacher and deputy head and things. Stepped off that work about 7 years ago because of literacy and reading, and I support schools all over the place to try and improve student outcomes through reading and other literacy interventions, particularly.
Thanks, Ruth. Today we're here to talk about improving reading in Key Stage 3. We're lucky enough to have worked with Ruth for some time now. She's supported the team at Reading Solutions in terms of improving our knowledge for it's at least a year now, isn't it, Ruth? So
Yeah.
she's got a lot of experience. I've got a lot of respect for Ruth. So we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the current landscape of reading in Key Stage 3, and then Ruth will share her experiences, the work that she's done with schools, the strategies that she supports schools with. We'll talk a little bit about Reading Plus as well. That's the program that we provide that improves fluency, vocab and comprehension across Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. But as we're going through, if you have any questions whatsoever, please just ask away. Feel free to come off mute and just ask any questions, or we've got someone monitoring the chat as well. So we do always ask for questions. Okay, we'll get started then. So Ruth, I'll go on to the first slide again. You're the one that knows more than me on this. So do you want to give a bit of background about what you see in the schools that you work with?
Yeah. Okay. So my background was I was primary trained and worked in upper juniors as was then many years ago. So year six now. And I only worked in primary schools for a year and a half before I made the transition to secondary. And what has struck me all these years later, sort of, current when I was working in secondary and now when I work with lots of schools, is that secondary school teachers cannot work harder than they are. They are incredible. They are highly committed and dedicated to their students. But the reading landscape has changed since I started teaching, 35 years ago. And I believe that students are still reading probably the same amount, but not necessarily the stuff, the content of reading that they need to be equipped to then cope with the very challenging reading curriculum at secondary school, which includes a lot more non-fiction. Non-fiction is harder to read. And then there's other societal changes, which unfortunately we haven't got time to look at today. But obviously, the impact of the pandemic, the growing gap between gender for girls always outperform boys. There are lots of issues that secondary school teachers are having to grapple with. Um, so my heart goes out to my secondary colleagues because I know how hard they work and how dedicated they are. But sometimes the schools that I work with, there is a lack of knowledge around reading and what can be done to support all readers in the classroom, regardless of subject. So, for example, modelling reading and particularly reading fluency. Um, Now, I know that many of you on the call will probably know about reading fluency, but what we mean by reading fluency is children or readers able to read at an appropriate pace and speed for the text that they're reading, being able to automatically recognize words, not having to decode every word, but only words that they might not be familiar with, the more academic words that they haven't met before, understanding context, self-correcting. That's what we mean by reading fluency. And whilst secondary school teachers can support students in their classroom by introducing comprehension strategies and modelling reading fluency, what they can't do is what Reading Plus enables children to do, which is become stronger, independent readers who read to fluency. And it introduces so many non-fiction texts in particular which support children. Um, so we know that the gap widens. It's called the Matthew effect, where a child, if you start behind, you tend to become more behind. And what has struck me about Reading Plus is that if, as an intervention in year 7, children that I am now working with in schools catch up quite quickly if they're given this targeted approach where reading and reading fluency in particular is targeted. Um, there's some research to show that if children are reading independently with fluency, they cover 30% more content of what they're reading. Um, and again, I would always stress, and some head teachers say to me, can't you just tell my staff that they're all teachers of reading? And I go, no, I'm not prepared to do that in a secondary school. I don't think secondary school teachers are teachers of reading. I think they're teachers of maths, science, PE, English, but they do need to have and be cognizant of the barriers and difficulties secondary school children come across with the challenging secondary school curriculum.
We were
Um,
just talking before, Ruth, weren't we? So my daughter is she's just starting a PGC. She's a well, she's going to be a geography teacher, and she's working with children. And she had a bit of a shock because she's gone in teaching. She literally just started in September. She's starting to teach a few lessons, but she's supporting the children with the work. And the levels of vocab has been a surprise for her because the children, she has to reframe and rephrase a lot of things to help the children
mm,
understand. So
mm.
I mean, fluency obviously it will underpin that reading speed. But do you want to talk a little bit more about about vocab, Ruth?
Yeah, so for example, the Royal Institute of Science, the Royal Society of Science, rather than the EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation, are very clear that 90% of scientific and maths vocabulary are of Greek and Latin origin, which means that non-fiction in those particular subjects and humanities as well, many of them, not quite as much as that, there is a huge demand on the students for very difficult polysyllabic academic vocabulary. And if you think about it, these students are going from one classroom to another and in a secondary school, which they weren't in a primary school. So imagine, let's in a 5 period day, those kids could go from English to maths to science to geography to PE, and that's called academic code switching. And each time they academic code switch, they're coming across different academic vocabulary for each subject. And they can meet in an hour's lesson up to maybe 7 or 8 new Latinate or a geography term, erosion, think about RE, transubstantiation. These are challenging words. And since 2016, when Michael Gove made the GCSEs a little bit more challenging, that's an understatement. You've got even more words in the curriculum which children are finding difficult. And as I mentioned before, they might be reading more because they're always on their phones, but they tend to be reading colloquial, everyday language, not academic words that we meet all the time in the secondary classroom.
Ian, thank you. Well, what I'll do now, if you don't mind me, I'll take a little step back and I'll talk about Reading Plus, but I'll talk about the reading journey that children take from Key Stage 1 all the way through to how they get to Key Stage 3. I will talk a little bit about Reading Plus, how that develops that fluency, but as we're going through, I'll talk about how it develops vocab as well. But Ruth also has other strategies from the work that she does with the schools as well. So she'll chip in alongside what I'm doing with different things, because Reading Plus is very good, but it's not the silver bullet, if you like. So it gets used as part of a structured reading curriculum. But Reading Plus really where we fit in its fluency development. So typically in Key Stage 1, children learn phonics, be that little Wandle, read, write, ink, etc. They'll follow a phonics scheme. When they've completed that, they'll have the mechanics to be able to read. But there then is a huge step in being able to read to learn, and that starts with that fluency development. If children aren't fluent readers, their working memory will get taken up with the physical act of reading, so they won't be able to take in the text as a whole. If you couple that with poor vocab as well, they'll just not be able to understand what they've read. So when they get to the end of a text, that are not remembered, and comprehension then becomes pretty impossible. So we will help students become fluent readers, free up that working memory to take in the text as a whole. They can then work on their in the text as a whole, using the program that helps with the comprehension development, expose them to lots and lots of vocabulary, and just develop really strong, competent readers. And we find that children that are good readers generally go engaged a little bit more because they don't find it so challenging and so laborious. Tie that in with having access to a vast range of texts, fiction and non-fiction, as we talked about, the difficulty with non-fiction. Then it's a key part of many schools' reading strategies through Key Stage 3. So that's kind of where we fit. And again, Ruth's got a lot of experience with the program, so she'll tie in bits and bobs as we're going through. But this is a good one for you, Ruth, in terms of what you've seen the slide.
Yes, so basically we mentioned before that, well, Ian just mentioned before that children who have been trained through phonics, they will be at a stage where word recognition can be strong, their phonics is strong. However, what you have to have in addition to an understanding of phonics is fluency. And I would say that fluency is the bridge between word decoding and comprehension. Because until you're automatic in your reading, as Ian said, your working memory is overloaded. So research indicates that a child that's still reading by breaking down each word, by decoding, so think of the word cat, by a child going at rather than looking at that and just knowing it means it is cat and what it means, they'll be taking 2.5 times longer to read. So if you think about that, again, I'll take science because it is so content full and this 90% of its words are of Latin and Greek origin. Think about that for a decoder. So Reading Plus is singular in saying it's not a decoding program. It's there to support comprehension. And I absolutely concur with what Ian's saying that if a child understands, then they'll be motivated to read further. If they're still decoding and it's not automatic and they're not having reading modeled to them in a desirable way, so they're not hearing staff read with intonation and expression and exaggerating punctuation and those kind of things, they're not going to be motivated to enjoy reading. So the what I'm not paid by Reading Plus, by the way, I'll just say that. I just want I've just found it's the only program in my experience that is evidence-based and supports children to begin to enjoy reading because it tackles the one thing, and that is comprehension. And fluency. And as soon as children can be fluent, they'll comprehend more. And it's that really fine balance that you've got to get right. And I know Ian will then explain about how Reading Plus actually works out the type of text that the child needs. And I think this is really important. So whilst a teacher can read a text to children that they can't understand, they obviously can't do that to in their entire lesson. They run out of time, which is why we need to have children automatic readers and strategic readers, readers that understand when they're not understanding, if you see what I mean.
And that ties in with what Debbie's just said. Debbie's just mentioned a good point there, like the different levels of ability of children within one class, and to
Oh,
be able
huge.
to support them individually it must be so difficult for teachers.
Absolutely. And Debbie, I think I completely, I feel your pain. What I would say to a class teacher is if you know, and you should know, every teacher should know the children's chronological reading age that they have to teach. The one massive support you can immediately is to read the text that they're having to read to fluency. So, for example, on a PowerPoint slide, if a science teacher is about to teach an experiment, read the content of that slide to them. Because if they're not automatic, they're not reading for meaning, which is what Ian mentioned.
Thank you. Good point with what you've just been talking about for the children as well. We work with lots and lots of secondary schools. Typically, what I get told is that when children come into school, they'll run some kind of assessment, NGRT or something similar. Any student that's below 9.5 years chronological, they'll put them on some kind of phonics program. What we found with that, is that it might not be the best thing for them. And again, I'm Ruth the expert on this, but what we generally
Mm.
find is that they might have issues rather than it being a phonics-based issue. It might be that fluency, it might be vocab, it might be, there's lots of standards, there's lots of different things that will impact that assessment. So the default is technically to put them onto, I think it's Fresh Start that they use a lot of them. But we found that by putting students on Reading Plus, we can rapidly accelerate them. So just because that's what the assessment says, we've got a further assessment on Reading Plus that measures that reading speed, that vocab level, that comprehension level as well, and even motivation behind reading. And it underpins what the work that they do on the program. It sets them off at the right level for their reading ability. It sets the reading speed at the right speed for them. But even before that, it might help you decide how to support your children in a better way. One assessment on its own, yes, you will get a certain amount of data, but if you have different assessments that tell you different information, you can really triangulate that data and support the students exactly where they need it. And that's how Reading Plus starts off, with that baseline assessment.
And it's staggering, the number of students that are in a mixed ability class, um, and aren't either resilient or motivated to read. So you get, in one class, you can have children who are strong decoders but poor comprehenders. You might have strong comprehenders and strong decoders. But part of my work in schools is to try and give staff the information they need to be able to identify those different type of readers in a class, because Debbie's point is an absolutely pertinent one. The range of reading abilities in one class is massive. Um, and so you need a reading intervention like Reading Plus to catch up those so many students who just are not automatic or independent readers. How can you possibly teach the secondary curriculum to children who have got a reading age of under 9? The average GCSE paper has a reading age of 15 years, 6 months.
Hmm. That's crazy. Thank you. So moving on to the next slide, what is Reading Plus all about? I've just explained a little bit about the baseline assessment. So our assessment, all of the program is backed by, it's pretty much the most heavily researched program on the market, both in terms of its development and its ongoing efficacy and its ongoing, just the impact that it has with students. They'll set a baseline assessment, which again, heavily researched. We work through students' motivation behind reading. We work out their vocabulary level. Vocab is the best predictor of comprehension, pretty much. So from that, we can put them at texts that are relevant to their vocab level within the assessment. We can then work out a comprehension level and then work out a reading speed off the back of that. So like I say, it's steeped in research, the assessment. It's an adaptive assessment. It's unique in what it delivers. So from that, we will put the children at the appropriate level for their reading ability, but also their reading speed as well. I think it's important that we differentiate the two, because if children are slow readers but competent readers, they will still struggle to get through the texts. So it will take that time. So we know that we can increase fluency. The way we do that is not dissimilar to the recommendation that comes out of the EAF in terms of repeated rereading. So the reason why repeated rereading works is because the children don't get stuck on fixations. Basically, that's one of the big things with fluency, is that fixations. It's the regressions. It's the having to go back to check the text. So we put children at a level that is suitable for their reading ability, so they don't have those fixations, those regressions. They can understand most of the text in the text that they're reading. And then we can work on that fluency. So the eyes, basically, made of 6 muscles, aren't they, that support the eye. You need to train them in the first instance to read from left to right effectively. But then from that, again, it's a way of reading efficiently, scanning from left to right. So the guided window was developed to help with that. Reading Plus in its first instance was developed by optometrists, and that's how they worked out that when children aren't reading efficiently, their eyes skip all over the page. So a very basic level, this guided window helps with that left to right scanning. It helps develop automaticity, and it improves reading efficiency. It is set bespoke to each student. depending on how they perform on the baseline assessment. We then have strategies in place to increase that reading speed so they get gradually quicker and quicker, but keeping their understanding nice and high, until we get up to chronological, and then they see less and less of this guided window because they're in a position there where that good reading efficiency has been modeled to them. They've learned those skills and they can then read independently. So that's the guided window. That kind of underpins the fluency development on Reading Plus. This is one that Ruth likes to talk about quite a bit. But one of the things that Reading Plus does offer is a vast range of texts, fiction, non-fiction, informational texts. We know that non-fiction texts are difficult to engage with sometimes because they can be a little bit dry, but the way that they're delivered on Reading Plus, they're delivered in an age-appropriate way for the pupils, the students, but also they're interesting. They're dressed up nicely. So I used to go into schools pre-COVID and not so much anymore, but you'd always get feedback from the students about interesting facts they've learned. They'd talk about, there's a bit of gamification on Reading Plus, which I'll talk about as we're going through, but they'd talk about these things called combos that they're doing, and seeing engagement with reading is fantastic because there are a lot of distractions now. I always talk about when I was younger, we had a computer so we had a Spectrum 48K, and had a few games and you had to load them. It took forever to load a game. So we didn't really have as many distractions when we were younger. So I don't know if it's just me, but I tended to read a lot more because of that. And that developed
Absolutely.
it, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But we find that there's a lot of kids now don't even have books in the house and stuff like that. So exposing them to lots and lots of interesting texts has lots of different benefits. And our texts are written on a concept of windows and mirrors, and they're written specifically for Reading Plus as well. So again, it comes back to the research behind the program. Everything on Reading Plus is done for a specific reason, and that is to improve fluency, improve comprehension, improve vocab, and to improve engagement. And that's what the program is based on doing. So all the texts are written to impart information, to help that fluency development, to help with the comprehension development. I'm quite proud of the program, if you can probably tell. But
Can I
it's
just
fun.
can I just add there,
Sorry.
Ian? You mentioned earlier about how very often sometimes students start at secondary and then they'll have a GL assessment or whatever, and often a phonics intervention is given. It is something that Ofsted is very keen to raise awareness around. A lot of schools do exactly what Ian said, which is that it must be a phonics problem if they're not reading. And it's really important to understand that it isn't all about phonics. That you can be a strong decoder, so have very good phonics, but still not be comprehending. And students at secondary become increasingly skilled and adept at disguising that, which is why this additional layer of diagnosis that Reading Plus offers is very, very useful.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, so we've got lots of text. Like I said, they're written on the concept of windows and mirrors. So we think to get engagement, students have to see something of themselves in terms of what they're reading. So that's the mirrors to get that buy-in, but then the windows expand horizons. There's a story I always use. There's a school fairly local to us, that's about a mile away from the seaside, from the beach. But the school used to take it's a private area, but the school used to take the children onto the beach every year because some of the kids didn't go there, and it's sad. I mean, it's what it is. But if children aren't exposed to things, if they haven't got those experiences, then they won't have information about it. They won't know the vocab behind it. They won't know what a picnic is. They won't know these different things. So again, by those windows, they exposed students to lots and lots of different scenarios, new experiences, and it helps build the vocab, but hopefully it triggers something in them as well where they want to learn more, they want to develop, they want to go and see these things. So it's about just I genuinely think that we can improve life chances through reading. Obviously, it's a no-brainer, but through Reading Plus as well. That's what we do. So moving on, high quality texts. So there's lots of different genres on Reading Plus and the cross curricular. Ruth will talk to you a lot about the importance of the academic vocabulary as well and how that ties in. But that's what Reading Plus does. It helps with the engagement. So that's the first thing. if students have got a very so example of this, if a student goes to a library and they're book banded, they've got a small amount of text that they can choose from. There's nothing there that really engages them. Straight away, they'll switch off because there's just nothing to drive that engagement. We give them, I think there's probably about 80 or 90 texts at each level on the program, and the high interest, the age appropriate, but their ability leveled as well. So if you've got a weaker student in year 7, they'll still have access to a huge range of texts. We've got sport, history, technology, arts and culture, mystery, famous people, nature. You get the idea, loads of different genres, but it's positioned at just their readability level. So they might be reading at a year 4 level, but they'll still have the texts there to choose from that high interest and age appropriate as well. I think that's massively important. As they read through a text, at the end of it, we ask them 10 questions to measure their understanding. Those questions are the key questioning styles that they'll come across. It's that inference, it's the retrieval, it's the use of language, it's the key skills that they need. There's a bit of gamification in the program where if they score above 80%, and these things called combos that they use to move at the level as well. So there's a lot of different facets to the program to drive that engagement, but what really underpins it is the high quality text that the children read from. And then I don't know if you want to say a few bits in terms of that academic vocab that we talked about, Ruth.
Yeah, I'm just aware of time as well that people might want to contribute to our discussion as well. But yeah, I mean, basically, I mentioned that non-fiction is more difficult to read, and that's not me, just that's not an opinion, it's a fact. Non-fiction is full of nouns, and we can't kind of talk about that much. We haven't got time, but basically what Ian said there is if you don't know the vocabulary, the specialist vocabulary needed, you can't guess it. You just have to be taught it. And again, your subject teachers in a secondary school, they're doing a really great job with that, but they can't possibly fill the vocabulary gap in lessons. So what we need to do is get the children independently reading more of the right stuff. And that's what Reading Solutions is aiming to do. And again, the high interest texts, some fiction, some non-fiction, are interesting and relevant as well.
Thank you. Comprehension development, you're right, Ruth. We've been talking away. We've got a few minutes at the end, so I'll just go through these last couple of slides. But like I say, questioning styles, it's important that the students understand what they're reading. But the main benefit from this, from a teacher's perspective, is that the reporting element of Reading Plus is fantastic for you. So you've got 30 children in the classroom. They're all reading independently, the text at a high interest, age appropriate, just the right level for them. You can then monitor from the reports how the students are getting on. You can see if how students are progressing through the program. So there are increases in the reading speed, comprehension levels, the vocab levels. Again, that's giving you that information, the snapshot for all your students, right? These are strong readers. They're fine. They can crack on. We don't need to worry about them too much, but these are the ones I really need to focus my attention on in the classroom because they might need help with that vocab. So you can see that straight away. You can there's lots of information. There's extra support
The
for.
other thing that's so useful, you mentioned earlier in about rereading. So so a child that is a decoder or hasn't understood something won't necessarily know that the first strategy they should use to improve their understanding is to reread, actually. Doug Lemov says it's in Reading Reconsidered, it's the least used strategy of children who are not strong readers. And what I like about Reading Plus is that Ian mentioned those 10 questions. If the children don't get some right, they don't just go on. The guided window takes them back to the bit they need to reread. So it's encouraging that massively important strategy of rereading. And when I do student voices in the student voice groups in schools, the one thing that students always say to me is, well, yes, Miss reads to me and explains things to me, but then we're on to the next thing. We're never given an opportunity to reread what we've been given and to process. And we know why that's difficult for a non-reader or a struggling reader because of what Ian's mentioned, their cognitive load. So this habit that Reading Plus has of the guided window going back to a part of the text that they've misunderstood or not read correctly is extremely good practice.
Thank you. And yeah, even when answering the questions as well, the students have the option to bring back the part of the text they need to answer the questions as well. So it's that rereading, it's the embedding that they need as well. And again, the comprehension is basic. It's bespoke for each student as well. That based on the level that they're at, will know at their level of understanding, their level of comprehension, and will adapt accordingly. And then vocab as well. There's about 2,500 base words on Reading Plus, but then we tie in word families and so on and so forth, so it expands that as well. But it's explicit vocab that needs to be taught, and there's a lot of access to that on Reading Plus as well.
And David Crystal, the linguist, suggests that the new, well, since 2016, Key Stage 4 curriculum, the GCSE exams, you need an academic vocabulary of 50,000 words. That is a hell of a lot of words if you think about many children that you're teaching being under their chronological reading age.
Yeah. It's just a couple of questions there. Simon one, it's is it one-to-one? No, the beauty of Reading Plus, it's better. It can be used in small groups. It can be used in tutor groups. It can be used however you wish. So typically, let's say in year seven, some schools will use it as soon as in the tutor groups first thing in the morning across the board in year seven. There will then be intervention groups as well for the weaker students. They'll use the program with higher intensity. There might be like the just belows, if you like, that don't really fit into any category. They might use it as part of their homework. And again, you can monitor it. So it can be adapted to individuals. But the beauty of it is it's designed to save you time. It's designed to expose the students to lots and lots of text, improve their reading on a one-to-one basis from pupil point of view. But like I say, you can just monitor the reports to see.
The other massive strength it has, and I've seen this working with the schools that I'm working in that are using Reading Plus, is if children, once they get the kind of fever about reading and see their reading ages going up, you can encourage them to read at home as well through Reading Plus. So the license can be at home. Well, obviously, you're doubling the impact then. And schools that I'm working with, are giving credits to children, first in the dinner queue as a kind of an incentive, if their reading ages are improving. And if you can double that impact by having, say, 20 minutes at home every night as well as 20 minutes in school 4 times a week, it's terrific.
Yep. No, thank you for that. Question there in terms of the impact. I think I've covered how it gets used in secondary schools, but the impact. Typically, if children can read around 5 stories a week, it's between 60 and 90 minutes a week of reading. After about 8 weeks, they'll have read around 40 texts. Once they're at 30, 40 texts, you'll see an average increase in reading speed of about 30 to 40 words per minute and about a year to a year and a half in terms of comprehension level gains. That's the kind of impact that you can see. That's broadly speaking across all pupils. It's a very effective program. There's a lot of research that shows that the gains that students make when using Reading Plus. Simon, you've asked a question that I'll come to in a minute. But I think that's it. Yeah, in fact, I'll come to your question now, Simon. So you talked about costings. Costings entirely bespoke to individual schools. But as a ballpark figure, if you're using it as a small scale intervention, it could cost around £4,500 for 3 years, but you can rotate the licenses, so the cost per pupil is relatively low, right up to if you're implementing it across Key Stage 3, it could be up to £10,000 or £12,000 depending on the school. But again, the cost per license is low in terms of the amount of children that you can support. So the per pupil per year cost ranges, but it might be around £15 to £25 per pupil per year. But like I say,
some schools have been really savvy as well with how they've implemented Reading Plus. So they haven't just thought, oh, year 7 or Key Stage 3 even. They've seen the impact in Key Stage 3, and then a school that I know in Norwich has just had incredible impact by then giving it using the licenses in year 10 and 11 for a short, intensive time. And again, that doubling it up at home. So, it's all about that motivation, as Ian suggested.
and one of the things, well, thanks, Ruth. One of the things I've not touched on as well is my company, Reading Solutions. So we provide Reading Plus, but we provide all training and all support for free. We believe in improving outcomes for young learners. That's what what we do. We work with nearly 1,500 schools in the UK, but we provide all the training support for free to make sure that you get the most from the program. I think it's massively important. It's a funny one working in education. It's a brilliant place to be. I absolutely love it. But as a result, we're effectively spending pupils' money when schools are buying the program. So we need to do the best job possible. So, like I say, everything's included in terms of that. We'll make sure that you get the most from the program, and it ties in with this 3-4 week pilot. We offer this because I always believe that schools should buy anything that they use, any programs they use. It's basically it's based on impact, sustainability, and scalability. Because we set on a 3-year license, we want you to be using the program as best you can over those 3 years to get the most value from the product, to see the most impact. But then you'll just continue to work with us for the following three years. So we'll do all we can to make sure that you get the most from Reading Plus. But the start of that is making sure that it's suitable for you. We think it will be. We're quite clear in terms of how we position it for the students that it will support. But the 3-4 week pilot is a chance for you to see it as proof of concept effectively. We're very confident in what we do. It's a chance for you to use in your setting. It's almost part of a managed rollout, so you can use it with a group initially, make plans then to roll it out to further cohorts, as Ruth said, if needed. But if you want to get in touch with regards to the pilot, our contact details are there. I think we're going to follow up with the attendees with an email just thanking you for attending. But I think we've talked quite a lot, and it'll probably be a good time if anyone does have any further questions. We've got a few minutes at the end. And please ask a question, because it's always awkward when people.
Fill the pregnant pause. I will just say that I think the most important thing is to understand that teachers are working incredibly hard. And it's my kind of life's work in the remaining of my professional career to support teachers in understanding how you can work differently to get the reading outcomes you want. And I think Reading Solutions support staff in their understanding of reading as well.
Thank you. Charlie, thank you for that. We recommend 30-minute sessions. So to read a text, it typically takes around 10 minutes to read, 10 to 15 minutes to read a text. It's a funny one in secondary curriculum because your time is so tight. But like Ruth says, that some will use it at home to get the extra levels of usage. But if they can read on average 4 or 5 stories a week, you'll see significant gains in a short space of time. And it's the little and often approach that we find. So like I say, 4 or 5 stories a week, it's not a great deal of time, but the impact that has is massive. And I don't need to tell people this, but we've often have conversations over time where schools will say, oh, well, there's not enough time in the curriculum because I've got maths, I've got science. If the children can't read, then they're not going to be able to engage with those lessons at a good enough level. And it's
It's
spending a bit
also
of time.
quite hard, isn't it? I mean, when I've sat with children engaged in your text with the guided window, it's jolly hard work because they're it's intensely following the words. So 20 minutes is excellent and probably long enough, because you're being steered to those words. You're not wandering off, as Ian said at the beginning. The guided window keeps them focused, and that's what sets it apart from other reading interventions that I've seen, reading programs I've seen.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we've covered how is the improvements reported to students, what measures reading ages. So the way that we do that, Debbie, they can see on their dashboard the progress up through the levels, but we're quite conscious of not attributing the levels on the program to reading ages or anything like that. It's because students all read at different ages, and that's the key to it. As long as they're progressing, that is the key to it. In the reporting for teachers, you can see that information clearly, and you can report that back when you're meeting with the students. But that's the key to it for us. It's progress at whatever level, and it's important that children see that progress, especially for the weaker ones that might have struggled through the whole of primary with reading. If they're achieving success on the program, it's brilliant, and that helps with that engagement. And it's lovely to see. Again, we have the pleasure of working with lots and lots of schools over the years, and seeing that is it's a really nice part of the job. Expected results, I think I covered that one. and the other one in terms of the increase in the reading speed and the comprehension levels. But like I say, after about 40 texts, which you can even easily achieve in just over a half term, you look at an increase in reading speed of about 30 to 40 words per minute, and about a year and a year to a half in comprehension level gains.
And I mean, obviously, a skilled literacy lead in a school, reading lead, will understand that an intervention has to be monitored. And obviously, when students come off a program, I like to call them kind of graduates of reading. In that case, they need to be monitored, because once they go back into mainstream lessons and don't have that intervention, they might need additional support in some way. Can't really talk about that now because we're running out of time. But it's own. You can't just expect a child to get to a certain reading age and then just abandon them and hope that they'll be okay. It's about keeping that resilience and motivation up.
Brilliant. I mean, we could have talked for a lot longer there, Ruth, to be fair, but I really appreciate your time today. It's always fascinating to listening to you. So thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for attending as well.